Okay, well, welcome to our March webinar. I'll do some quick introductory business here before we get started. So as you heard, the recording's in progress, and we have quite a large group today. Thanks for attending. Because of that, we'll have to see how we do. We want to have as interactive as possible, but also just understanding that it might be hard to address everyone. So if you can keep yourself muted, that'll help. Yeah, please do raise your Zoom hand or put a question in the chat, and we'll try to break and take questions along the way. And that way we can have as interactive and as helpful as possible. So before I introduce our speaker, just really quickly, apart from that quick business, I've got a little poll here that I'd like to launch that hopefully will give us a better idea of who you are today so that we know how to speak to you. So I'll go ahead and launch that. You could take a minute, please, to fill that out. Just click three questions. While you're doing your poll, we are your Greater Sacramento Capital Chapter of ARMA, the Association of Records Managers and Archivists. And I've got our website here, as well as our contact email address. If you're interested in getting notified about more events like this, please send us an email and get us on the list, or mention that in the chat. Our website could tell you more about our organization and how to get involved. We've got a long storied history, and we'd love to get you plugged in to future events, as well as lots of great volunteer opportunities. Let's see, we got about 90% of you have filled out the poll, so we're almost done there. Share results in just a minute, and we'll introduce our speaker.
Yeah, it looks like government seems to be the main audience.
And kind of a mix of different levels of involvement with data migrations history, a lot of roles in records information management, a little bit in legal and general business. So I'll in that poll and share results so everybody else could see that as well. Just for a second here. Well, very good. Thank you for joining us today. So I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, Nitza, today. She is our certified records manager and also holds a master's degree in library information sciences. And apart from being involved in ARMA, including as a past president of our chapter, but also in other ways, committees, she's also involved in her community in a lot of different ways through Rotary and Girl Scouts and other work. And she's the founder of InfoCompass Inc. That is involved in data migrations. So please help me welcome Nitza to our event today. Thank you very much. Yeah, go for it.
Thank you, Ed. Yeah, I'm really excited to be back at my home chapter to be able to present. There might be some who have heard this presentation before a few years ago, but I've added what I've learned over the last 5 years to make it fresh and include additional learnings over the last few years. But yes, definitely involved in ARMA, and I'm a Girl Scout troop leader, so I'm super excited to have finished cookie sales. So if you have any Girl Scout troop leaders, check in on them, ask if they're okay, because cookie sales are hard. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and let's see, share my screen. Well, before I do that, let me do it in presenter mode. So just 1 second. All right, so let me know if you see my screen. Give me a thumbs up, Ed. Looks good.
Yep. You're good.
All right, thank you so much. All right, so today I want to start a conversation to talk about data migrations and what records managers need to know. So, raise your hand or maybe say in the chat, are you about to start a data migration? Are you in the middle of a data migration? Are you just completed one? So let's see, I don't see videos, but I'm assuming, yep. So again, the chat, planning one right now, in the middle of one, about to start. So pretty much I figure all three choices. Thank you, Mary. So I would assume that if you're not involved in one, you're about to be, right? So it's good to understand about data migrations and what you can expect, right? So let me move this away. So why should you listen to me? So I'm the past president of the Sacramento chapter. That should be good enough, right? No. I've been doing data migrations as a part of records management software implementations for over 17 years. So I've been working mostly as a business analyst, records management consultant in these projects. So I very much understand through direct experience on what data migrations look like, and I've learned some things over the years, and that's why I have this presentation today. I wanted to share that with you and with the community to be able to learn from my experience. All right. So in this session, we're going to review the basics of data migration from a business perspective. Why many data migration projects fail, the 4 golden rules of data migration, and a data migration methodology. And if you're hoping to learn about scripting and SQL in today's talk, I'm sorry to disappoint you. I am not going to be covering that, but I have resources if that is what you're interested in. So just to let you know. So as you know, more and more records and information is stored electronically. Raise your hand if this is especially true after the pandemic. I think we all have learned that. And because of this, records and information need to be moved periodically, from one record system to another. And so what I would encourage records managers, information governance officers to understand is to really understand, what does a software project typical phases look like? And then how does data migration, what does that process look like? Because as you saw from my earlier question, if you're not already involved in a data migration, you are most likely will be involved in a migration. And so the more that you understand, the better you can serve your organization and lead them down a better path and avoid costly pitfalls. So what exactly is data migration? So data migration, I like this definition. I actually got it from Wikipedia. I looked at several definitions and I actually like this one the best. So data migration is the process of selecting, preparing, extracting, and transforming data and permanently transferring it from one computer storage system to another. So this is not the same as maybe a data warehouse process where things are, data feeds one the other. This is when we talk about a migration, data migration, it's really from one place and moving it to another. Additionally, there's usually a process to confirm that the migration was done completely and that the old system has been discommissioned or decommissioned. So that legacy storage database software has been decommissioned And so that is really when the migration process is complete, when you've shut off the lights on the old database. So what are the drivers of data migration? Why are we doing this? Well, one of them is that if you're in a company and there's a merger or maybe an acquisition of another company, you may need to do some consolidation of your data sources, right? So you might have to combine them together. Maybe when you originally implemented software, there were multiple databases and you need to consolidate them. I remember talking to an IT manager, and she was in the middle of combining 17 different databases into one because there was one database per office in her law firm. And so maybe in the past that was the best practice, but then as people want to work together and be a lot more work better together and consolidate resources, we were looking at consolidating databases into one. There might be large number of people coming or going from your organization, so like layoffs, hiring spree. That could be something that happens. Or if you're in a law firm, you might have lateral partner movement between firms that can spur a data migration. It's a part of matter mobility. You might have company or department dispositions. So maybe your company is selling off part of your organization. And so you need to be able to separate certain information as a part of that. I've also seen additional software needs. So maybe you're just going to a new software and you need to move it into the new software. And so you want to be able to take advantage of new features that are needed. Let's see what else. There might be information governance initiatives where maybe you're doing a file share cleanup or email cleanup, and you need to move data from one place to another. So those are some of the ones that I've come across. Does anybody have another reason that they have about data migration? So feel free to put that in the chat as well. But these are kind of the ones that I've seen as far as what is spurring, why we're doing a data migration. Right there. And another one is moving. So maybe you are a part of an organization that is moving a lot of your software to the cloud. And so maybe there's a data migration where you're moving it to a cloud software, like software as a service. So that can be another reason that you're doing a data migration. And let's go back. And then I'm looking at some of the items that are in the chat. So yep, on-prem to cloud migration, that's right. Software obsolescence, yep. So maybe there's a software that's going away and you need to figure out where to put that data. Exactly. Mainframe decommission, yep. Retention, okay. So yeah, so there's different reasons why you may need to have data migration. All right, so what are the benefits of data migration? So, some of the high level benefits is that, if you are, maybe you're that IT manager with 17 databases, you can remove the duplication of effort of entering in the same information 17 times, right? So you can remove the duplication of effort. As I said, you can utilize additional software features if you're going to a new software. So that is going to be very helpful. You may remove duplication of content. So maybe, once again, you have that those 17 databases. If there is a person who's working across offices and they're putting content in one database and another, so now you have duplicates. So, there might be duplicates. So you can remove that if you're storing them in the same database. And then another reason could be removing silos of information. So instead of having it in different places, you can, and having to, separately sign in to these different instances, you can now, have it all maybe in one place, depending on your configuration. So those are some benefits of data migration. I'm sure there's more, but those are kind of the ones that I think of when we're talking about migrating data from one system to another, or multiple systems to one. So when we talk about data migration, it's usually as a part of a project. And so there's usually two types of projects that I see data migrations formally in when we talk about software projects. One is in a traditional what we call a waterfall method, which is more of a linear project. And so if you're familiar with a software project, usually you'll have a project kickoff. There's usually some time for discovery, requirements gathering, maybe some design. Someone, your technical person, or maybe a consultant will build the software or install the software. And then data migration is kind of in there towards the middle. And usually as you're going through, it might be kind of, you get sign off on each of these phases, more of a linear process. Data migration might be in the middle. Once that's there, you may have like functional user acceptance training on the functional or user acceptance testing on the software using the data that's there, training, and then you go live. So it's kind of a linear process for waterfall. So when you're doing your project, you may have that in place. There's also another type of project it's called agile, and so it has many of the same phases, but you may also have more of a iteration process when you're talking about data migration, where you may have the data migration, software build, some testing, shorter testing, and then feedback, and sort of like a feedback loop until you get final approval to go through. So there might be two different ways that this data migration may happen in your project, but typically these are kind of the main two that I see when it comes to processes. So just being familiar, understanding kind of where data migration lives in these projects is going to be helpful. All right. So then if we dig deeper into the data migration phase, there are different tasks that happen during a data migration. And so at a high level, these are the tasks that were needing to be completed. So usually there's a strategy. So there's a plan, right? What do we want to have happen with the data when it moves from one place to another? What data sources? Is it just one database? Is it 2? Is it 17? What is the scope of those databases that we need to migrate? So we need to understand what those are. We need to look at those data sources. Are they set up the same way? Are they including the same codes? Maybe the codes in one database are the older codes that we used to use 3 years ago, but we revised those codes, and so they're kind of out of date. And so now this other one has new codes. So there's usually some sort of analysis of what is contained within that database. What are the inclusive time periods. Maybe this database that we want to migrate is 5 years old. Nobody's been adding to it. So it's everything from like, 2019 and older. But then we also have this other database that has more recent information. So as we're looking through these data sources, we may see that we need to do some what we call normalization or data cleanup, where we need to make certain data, similar or the same, so that we can, when we're moving them to the new place, they are in the right places. So then there's the data conversion. So changing it, maybe it was called ABC company in the old system, and now it's all about computers in the new system, and you need to make some changes in the way that either the information is represented or coded. So there may be some conversion so that it can then be brought into the new system. And so then that migration happens, it's executed according to the conversion, any rules that have been put together. And then there's somebody there who's auditing and doing a check of what that information looks like. They may have one system up, actually two systems, the old system and the new system. They're confirming, did that information in the old system make it over in the right way in the context of the new system? And then if it has not, then they report those issues. So once that has gone through the validation, that audit process by usually the subject matter experts, those that have been using that original software, then you will get an approval of that migration. So as I was going through and making up this slide, it really made me think about, this is super similar to what we as records managers have done traditionally. So this is me back in New York City, working as an archivist and records manager, doing things, being able to review files and records and data. And so my data was paper, right? And looking through and being able to review what was there and understand what was there. And so as I was looking through these data migration tasks, I'm thinking, this is what records managers do. This is this is similar to traditional records appraisals when we're reviewing what is the context of records. So we have, what do we have? We have an appraisal strategy, how we're going to review records, how we're going to go into maybe different departments and review what kind of records they have, identify where those records are held. We look at those records to see what kind of information is there and what the context is within the organization. As we're going along and maybe doing a survey, we may identify things that need to be cleaned up because they may not be going according to our policies or according to our naming conventions, right? We may identify items that need to be converted. So converted in this case might be imaging and scanning them to make them be electronic images, right? We may identify items that need to move from in the office to offsite storage. And then we may, once we get all of this together, we may get an approval for records to be sent off site or whatnot. So this is a parallel kind of process that I want you as records managers and information governance professionals to really feel like this is down your lane. This is something that you can also understand and be able to do as well. So, what are some of the key reasons that data migrations might fail? And so, as I was preparing this presentation, there weren't that many data migration uh, uh, golden rules out there, or I was looking around, there wasn't so many frameworks out there, but I did find a really good resource that I include in the slides. And there's a book called Practical Data Migration by Johnny Morris. And he outlined some of the key reasons for data migration failure. And so the first one identified is what he calls technocentricity. And I have to agree with them. And so basically it's the concept is that data migration is just an IT issue, and that the business doesn't really need to concern it. The IT people will come in and they're going to just move it from this database to the other, and it's going to be easy, and we'll take care. It'll be taken care of by IT, and you don't need to worry about it. You can continue to do your business, and yeah. So is one of the the reasons why it can fail. And so for those projects that are successful is when the business, I'm going to say business, the business owners, the people who own that system from a business perspective, those who are taking ownership of that process, of the data migration process, and really see this is my responsibility to make sure all things are going well. Those projects are the ones that are successful when you have the business partnering with IT to get the data migration done. Another reason that data migration might fail is what's called a lack of specialist skills. So to do data migrations, you really have to be a part business analyst, so somebody who understands how to talk to the business, as well as part technologist or part IT tech. So maybe it's not all in one person. Maybe you have two people kind of filling this role, but if you don't have both pieces of the puzzle, then your data migration may not work very well, because you need to have the business person be able to talk to the business in the business's language, use their words, their terminology, and not just IT speak, right? Because then your business people may not feel comfortable in speaking up if they don't quite understand what the IT people are saying. And then the IT people may think that they're saying something perfectly clear, but it might be more IT specific. The words they're using aren't quite matching up with what the business understands. And so then you have a mismatch, and then there can be failure and misunderstandings. So having Kate, having an IT translator who can talk to the business, tell IT what the requirements are, and then IT can tell the translator how what they need and what they're seeing in the data, and ask for guidance from the business. So having somebody who can do that, if it's one person, that's great. If you need more than one person to kind of be able to manage that, but you do need to have that as a part of your project. Another is underestimation. So data migrations take a lot of work, honestly. And so it can require some data preparation and review of what you have. And so until you actually start getting in there and looking at the data and looking at the patterns, sometimes it's hard to estimate how much time it's going to take and how many people need to be involved to make decisions. So, giving yourself some additional leeway time is going to be a good thing, like a buffer, to be able to do your data migration. And then the last one that Johnny Morris calls is the blame game. And so this is where things are going wrong. IT is blaming the business, so this is what will happen. So maybe IT was trying to say that it was it's an easy project. We'll get it done. Very easy. And so we're going to go ahead and start working on the data migration. So the business kind of goes away and does their business thing. They have a busy job. Projects are kind of additional work, right? And so then IT will go through, they'll do what they can. And then at a certain point, they'll probably get a list of things don't fit the pattern and we need somebody to make some decisions. So then they'll bring that list back to the business and say, okay, tell us what to do. But then the business will come back and say, we're busy, we don't have time. Each one of those is going to take a long time to research. And so they didn't, maybe as a part of the project kickoff, they didn't realize that this was coming. And so then there's a lot of finger pointing. And then usually this is towards the middle to the end of the project. So if you don't set expectations at the beginning, it can be a challenge. So I don't know if anybody's felt any of these data migration issues before, but yeah, that it can happen. So then what are the golden rules for data migration? So the first one would be that data migration is essentially a business issue, not a technical issue. And so what does this mean? So basically, the business, think of the business as like a homeowner, and they need to move to a different home, right? Because it's nicer, has a pool in the backyard, And so, so they're the owner of that data, that area. You ask the IT people, the movers, to help you move the information from one place to another. But you still have to guide them, right? You still have to guide them. You need to tell them, yep, these boxes here, those need to go in the kitchen. Or, hey, this is garbage. Don't pick that up. That needs to be tossed. So there's some guidance, there's some ownership, right? So that's what this rule is about. It's basically the ownership of the overall data migration really needs to be the business. It's their data, and they need to be involved, if not, just, governing that process, right? And the technology staff are there to facilitate that move and ask questions where necessary to be able to move that information. The next rule is that the business knows best. And so what I mean by that, and what John Morris meant by this, is that the business works in this data day in and day out. They understand the context of the data. So if they tell you that something is not right, there's something that needs to be reviewed, that you need to be careful about this certain thing, that needs to be taken into consideration and honored. Maybe when you're talking through with the business, you need to talk to maybe multiple people in the business because maybe not everybody knows the complete picture. But generally, the business knows best with their data. But I will add a caveat from my own experience. Trust, but verify, because the data that they say is in the database may not be quite the same way that they describe verbally. Or maybe the data was the way they say it was from when they were hired on to today, but maybe their predecessor didn't have the data that way. So there might be some questions about that. Or maybe a previous migration happened and that data didn't come over the right way. So there, you always have to, as a technology, me being on the more services vendor side, I always trust but verify. Here's a big one. No organization needs, wants, or will pay for perfect quality data. So you will need to talk to your people and make sure that they understand that there might need to be some compromises on the data migration to get the data in from one system to another, because the systems could be different. And so you may need to make some decisions about when it comes over. Because usually somebody needs to have this migration done on a certain time schedule. So you're either going to have, what is that triangle? It's like time, quality, and like resources, right? So usually you can have two, but it's going to affect a third, right? And then the fourth one, if you can't count it, it doesn't count. And so what this means is that when you are doing a data migration, you need to understand what can you count regarding the data. When it's in one system and it goes to another, what exactly are you counting when it moves over? So what you may want to do is find out, say this is a commercial database and you have purchase orders and customers, right? So the object that you are counting could be the number of customers, the number of orders, not the number of fields, individual fields, right? So it's really like an item. So I'm in more the legal industry. So when we do data migrations, we're counting the number of clients, the number of matters, the number of files, the number of boxes. So there has to be some numbers, and you need to be able to have your data migration person give you, well, what are the numbers that it started with? What are the numbers that you ended up with when you move to the next system, so that you can have some numbers to be able to track. So what are some best practices for data migration? So you want to do that migration strategy, understand what you're going to migrate, and what you're going to migrate, and be able to do that. You want to have a data inventory and analysis. You're going to do a gap analysis and mapping, and each one of these I'm going to go a little bit deeper into. You're going to execute that data migration. You'll do that data validation, and then you'll decommission the software at the end. So for the migration strategy, you're going to want to say, well, what's in and out of scope? And that can be a simple question, and that can be a complex question. It really depends on what the business needs. If it's just one system, then it might be easier. But if you have systems that are feeding into that system, you may need to consider that as well. you have to determine what kind of project methodology you may be following, like agile or waterfall, and that may depend on, you know, the software and the service consultants or the people who are going to be doing the migration for you. They may have a preferred method that works best, so you may want to consider that. You'll need to determine who's going to be involved, who are the key stakeholders and team members. So, you know, it may depending on how many people, you may have to develop a RACI matrix to keep track. So, you know, that's the responsible, accountable, consulted, informed, like a spreadsheet. So you may have to go down that route if there's a lot of people. And then you want to communicate that migration strategy so that everybody understands, you know, and everybody's on the same page. And then as a part of that RACI, you may also want to add, you know, who's going to make decisions when it comes to there's an issue and that IT team comes back and says, hey, here's the list. Who can help us? Who can provide us direction? You should have some people who know that they're going to be involved in that. So data inventory analysis, is there one data source or multiple? How big are the data sources? You know, that's going to be, that might indicate how long the migration can take. You know, where are the data sources located? Is this on premises, in the cloud? Is it in a different country? You know, can we consolidate? Maybe there's some privacy rules that we need to consider. So we need to understand this before we move forward. Is there rot, redundant, obsolete, trivial data that needs to be deleted? Or maybe we can take advantage of this migration to improve the data quality. Are we going to work on standardizing on a certain set of codes? Because maybe in one database, we're using the old codes and the new database has the new codes. So maybe it's not old and new. Maybe it's just there's multiple databases and each department has their own way of coding things. And we need to agree on a new way forward. So there might be some discussions around that. You know, so in databases, usually there's some sort of users indicated, names indicated. You know, is that centrally managed in an application like Active Directory? If not, you might need to have some mapping regarding names as well, or else you might have duplicate as well. So those are all things to think about. And so you're able to, you can create a spreadsheet to be able to determine some gap analysis. And so here, this is just an example of what I use a lot for data mapping and understanding, you know, how the data from another system is going to be coming into a software. So here I have, like, these are database names, you know, for a software. You may need to know how big fields are, right? Because if in an old system, the field was 4,000 characters, but in the new system, that field is not the same, then you may need to work through either separating or concatenating information in different fields in the new system. So usually you have it's like a data map of how this information is coming in. And so this will usually capture the target system, the old database. I usually like to include not only the field names in the back end, but what does the business see as captions in the front end? Because once again, if you're talking, you don't want to talk just as IT people. You need to also have the front end business terminology so that everybody's on the same page. And then any rules that happen regarding the migration can be noted. So for example, Here's a common one. You have dates, and maybe your database dates weren't stored in what is called UTC standard time. So when you're migrating, you normally need to have it on the standard time. This is the standard that usually migrators use, because that data gets put on a server. You need to have it on that standard, and then locally, when you're signing on to that computer, it takes into account your time zone and changes it appropriately. But if you're not doing it on the standard, then your dates and times could be off. So yeah. So you usually want to do a gap analysis and be able to do a data mapping. So what are some common data migration issues? So these are things that I see in data migration. So maybe users are inconsistently identified in more than one database. So I'm going to tell you an example from like a legal one. So maybe in their matter management or their time billing system, they might use a timekeeper number there. But then in their record system, they use an Active Directory user ID, but there's no connection. So then when we try to migrate to the new system and have a data feed, you potentially could have duplicate users. So then there has to be a discussion around that. How can we map that? How can we make sure that we're not making the data worse? Locations, making sure that physical locations of items are, migrated into the record software appropriately. So if you're tracking physical locations one way in the old system and you need to do it a slightly different way in the new system, then you need to, do that carefully. And, not only for physical locations, electronic documents. So some older record systems, they may have, they may point to a location on a file share that a document or a record is located, but maybe that record system really isn't a true record system because the document no longer exists there anymore. And so it's gone. And so when you try to do that data migration, you'll find here's some empty locations that did not have those items. So that usually will come up as a part of the data migration. We'll find, oh, here's some missing documents. And then someone has to go review and find out what happened, right? There might be inconsistent data governance. So you might have, as I mentioned before, different lists of practices or departments coded differently. Maybe they use a word slightly differently in each system. So you have to kind of review that. In some cases, you can do what's called the was-is list. It was this, now we're going to use this new code. And that can be done as a part of the data migration to correct that. As I mentioned before, there might be poor quality data from previous migrations. So you might have to address that because maybe there was some missing information. So you might have to do some data cleanup as a part of that. Right. And then the next one goes back to the technology skills. So when you have a person on your project that needs to understand how the data was used in the old system, business process, whatnot, and then how it's supposed to be used in the new system. And make sure that any transformations that need to happen, because what you don't want to do is have someone who doesn't have the skills, does not truly understand how the software is supposed to work, and then migrating the data, and then the new software has gaps in the data because it wasn't transformed, and now you can't use the software as needed. So example, sometimes I will see for record systems, there's like a circulation or check-in, check-out function in an old system that may be done differently. Like maybe they only tracked a person's name with a file folder, but in the new system, they may be tracking 3 bits of information: the name, physically where they're located, and then a status of circulation in or out. So if all those bits aren't working well, then the new system is not able to work. So somebody basically make sure to have a subject matter expert who knows how to do the software in order to make sure that the software that you end up with works well. And then I've seen some cases where the audit history, especially in records management systems, the audit history is not migrated. So don't assume that your technology people are doing the audit history as well. So you, as a part of that data validation, make sure that that audit trail circulation history has been migrated, and as it is included, because that is what the chain of custody, especially with physical items, you know, that you need to make sure that that is brought in. And then, as I mentioned, you know, when migrating dates usually are using something like UTC. And so if they're not using that, then your dates are off. And then when you're doing data validation, it's like, huh, this is like a whole day off. I don't know why. So cloud databases so if you're getting some information like a data feed from a cloud database, you might need some additional data requirements when it's moving the data into, say, a new system as well, because you may not have direct access to a source database. And so you may need to be specific about the data that you do need going forward, like a modified date or a created date, to be able to understand, you know, what has changed in a system. So making sure that you get the required information. And then what I see a lot for cloud migrations is that you may not, for cloud migrations, you may need to have a lot of that validation done, you know, as much as you can, usually on premises before it gets uplifted to the cloud. And so you want to have a better quality, or make sure that your data validation is done very well, because it may be a lot harder once that data is up in the cloud for you to address certain changes that might be easy when it's still on-prem. So those are some things to keep in mind. But the main thing I want you to understand as records people is that if you have a question, don't be afraid to ask, because usually you're especially with records management software, data migrations, you're the business, you're the ones who need to understand what is happening as a part of this data migration. So don't be afraid to ask. And the second thing is, remember that data migration, the perfect data migration, is not always possible. So once again, data migration, usually you have some rules. The data is exported from an old database, stored into a staging table, and then imported into the new database. Here's just an example of what a data validation issue list can look like. So when you are doing that comparison, you can compare the old and the new. If there are issues, you want to note those issues. If you have a data validation checklist, that's going to be helpful. These are the fields we want to look at. Compare those to what those are in the old system, and then be able to bring this back as feedback to your implementer. And then you'll want to determine when you are going to be able to turn off the old system. And so you may want to keep that old database read-only for a few weeks after the new system is gone live, because maybe, you know, you may find something in the real use of the software that you didn't catch during data validation. So I wouldn't turn it off completely. Keep it kind of in reserve just in case you need to get at it. And then, what a lot of people do when they're doing these migrations from old software to new is that for a time period, they may even do double data entry in the old system and the new system for a short period of time. Or they might have a Delta migration over a weekend when they're moving from one system to another. And then some may have a kind of a quiet time where they say, oh, well, records isn't going to do anything for a week. And we are going to do a production migration over a time period. So the key takeaways is that data migration is not solely the responsibility of IT. Records managers must become familiar with the data migration process. You're going to be involved in a project, if not today, tomorrow. Make sure you have enough time in your migration, and make sure you set the right expectations from the beginning. So this is the book that I was mentioning, Practical Data Migration, 3rd edition by Johnny Morris. So you might want to look into that if you're interested. And he has a whole framework around it. Here's 3 other resources as well that are good if you're looking at data migrations, a professional organization, a community here. And then usually when you're doing a data migration, data governance starts to come up. So here's a Data Governance Institute, has some great resources as well. So thank you so much. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Otherwise, this is how you can contact me if you think about something later. And that's it. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. I also put in the chat a link to sign up for our chapter's mailing list for future events like this, or if you want to get more involved, as well as our contact information there. Yeah, thank you very much for this presentation, and thank you all for joining us today. Hope to see you soon.
Thank you. Any questions in the chat? Nope. All right. All right. Thank you, everyone.